Mothers would not let their sons sign up if they were going to be, carrying rifles and marching. But the camps were run by unemployed World War I veterans. We're talking 1933, so the First World War was only 15 years earlier. So it gave over 250,000 veterans a chance to run these camps. 2.6 million young men between the ages of 17 and 25 enlisted over its 9-year run from 1933 to 1941. One fellow told me the first day at camp, the captain said, "Men, I'm here because I needed a job. You're here because you needed a job. I'm going to show you respect, but I want some respect in return." Nobody looked down on each other in those camps. They all came from the unemployment line. Now, to qualify for the Cs, you had to come from a family on relief or a very poor farm family. And the social services woman would go out and interview these young men, and if you came from a very large family, that improved your chances of being accepted. This was a volunteer program, and the reason was because most of the money you earned was sent home to your family. They had many nicknames. They were called Roosevelt's Tree Army. They planted 5 billion trees nationally. They were called the Boys in Green, the Soil Soldiers, the Soldiers of Poverty, the Crazy Khaki Kids, the Canvas-Covered Casanovas. But my favorite nickname is Dollar a Day Boys, $30 a month. Now, a dollar back in the Great Depression was worth about $20 a day. You could go to the movies for a dime, a new pair of shoes for $1.50. Your money went a long way. But the genius of the program was 25 out of that 30 was sent home directly to the family. Those guys never saw the money. They had $5 spending money. Well, that's $100 a month in today's money. You could buy a beer for a nickel at the saloon and buy a new pair of shoes, like I said, $1.50. So it was a real win-win situation. So not only did the program give work to these young men, but it was a relief program for the parents back home. It put food on the table. And the average C, that's what they like to be called, Cs. The average C had 6 to 7 dependents. So if you do the math, 2.6 million times 6 or 7, that's 15 million people. That's over 10% of the country's population was receiving this income back home. And that's important because in the Depression, many people were too proud to accept relief. They came from the old country. We don't need your help. You're going to take our son to fight in your war, We don't want, they didn't want the government involved in their life. They wanted their freedom. And they would rather starve. And people were starving because they wouldn't accept relief. But if they had a son planting trees or building roads, they took that $25 a month. One fellow told me, and a lot of these fellows here, one fellow I can still remember him, his picture's up there in the museum, in the bunkhouse. He said, "My dad had plenty of work. He was a blacksmith, but nobody could pay him." Another told me that he was an orphan. William Wiley, he was living on a farm here near Grayling with his grandmother. She said she used that $25 to pay the back taxes on her farm. He saved the family farm. Mike Rataj, he said his mother had a savings account for the first time in her life. Another fellow said his sister went to teacher's college with that $25 a month. But most of the fellows said it went for food. I'll never forget a fellow down near Bay City came up after my program. "I wasn't in the C's, but my brother was. That $25 a month put food on the table for my 11 brothers and sisters. It kept us alive, I'm telling you. It kept us alive." And tears were coming down his cheeks. I've had that happen a half dozen times. He said his mother had enough food left over to make a big pot of bean soup for the neighbor because the man's wife had died. He was raising 3 children. There was no relief for single dads. Think about that. Relief in those days, the relief lady would tell the husband, "Get out of the house so those kids don't starve." And he'd sleep in some guy's attic or moving with his brother-in-law, get out of sight. And that qualified his wife to take the wagon down to the relief building. She'd give him a can of lard and maybe some salt pork, a chunk of government cheese, some flour, sugar, salt, some dried milk. beans, rice, the bare essentials, then you're out the door. You want some fresh fruit, go climb an apple tree. You want some meat, follow those rabbit tracks. That's what it was like back then. The deer and turkey populations were wiped out. People were hunting 12 months out of the year. So these were very desperate times. So these young men, it gave them a new lease on life. It wasn't just about having a job. It was about having a sense of worth and value. One of the fellows in my video, Mike Rataj, he grew up in Hamtramck outside of Detroit, some of you may know. He said he was living with his mother and two brothers in an $11 a month apartment. His mother was a waitress earning about $1 a day. The dad had taken the train out west looking for work. Never heard from him again. He owned one pair of shoes. They fell apart. The leather uppers came apart from the soles. He said, I glued them, I taped them. He couldn't fix them. They flapped when he walked. He was so embarrassed in high school, he dropped out of school. The kids were laughing at him. He's outside of a shoe store. On the sidewalk, there's a table. He steals a pair of shoes, runs down the street, cuts into an alley, but there's a beat cop having a cigarette. And he had been arrested by that same cop 3 months earlier for petty thievery. He was on probation. Now he was in trouble. He was going to go to jail. But the officer took pity on him and said, you're a good kid, you belong in the CCCs. And the judge agreed and gave him a choice. You can go to jail for 6 months, young man, or you can volunteer for the C's for a year. I'll go to the C's. I'll go to the C's. It changed his life. He was only 16, he stole a pair of shoes. Officer said, boy, you've gotta choose between a life of crime and doing the right thing. The judge looked down upon his face, said, we gotta get you out of this place. It's time for a new start in the CCC. He arrived scared and angry, feeling alone, not knowing what he would find. He discovered a world he could call his own, a place he found peace of mind. Well, they woke him one day at an early morning hour, drove him to a fire lookout tower, showed him the land he had to defend. Spent 6 months fighting fires by hand, shoveling dirt turns a boy to a man. He's walking the streets, hungry back home. After a year in camp, that young man had grown. His shoulders were straight, his shoes had a shine. He discovered a world he could call his own, a place he found peace of mind.